Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Tuesdays with Story. I'm Daniel Parker, and I am the writer and creator of the comic book, of course, that you just saw the trailer for,
Mhm.
Guardian Angel, if I can spit the words out right.
Which I'm glad that your musical theme on there is in tempo. I swear that YouTube countdown song changes meter somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, I noticed that.
It never doesn't drive me crazy.
Yeah, yeah. I need to find somebody to put an intro together for us, a proper intro. Uh, but yeah, so Guardian Angels mailing list is up. Uh, Sign up to if you sign up, you get not only will you be able to access a secret tier, where you will be able to buy an alternate version cover, but you'll also get a free art print if you're amongst the next 50 to sign up. Oh,
Yep. Plus, you get a reminder when the book launches, and the world is a busy place. You can forget about cool things until they're gone.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, you'll want to be here, and obviously, as you said, get notified once this book launches. So yeah. All right. Now on to my partner in
Yes.
crime here.
Yep, and I'm DB Fastbinder, also known as Darth Bobcat in the various corners of the internet. And this week I'm shilling something a little bit different. This week, you can pick up a copy of my Amazon book or Amazon short story, Second Contact, a Checkpoint Alpha story, for the price of zero. It's done shockingly well so far, considering that I haven't been trying to shill it as much as normal. So make that even better.
Yeah, yeah. I've like many of DB's things. I've been meaning to read this one. Obviously, being a sci-fi writer myself, this one caught my attention.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you've been watching the show and haven't read any of my stuff, well, first off, shame on you. But this would be a pretty good one to start with. Even my boss liked it.
Oh, wow.
Mm.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. All right. So yeah. So you can't beat free. So go ahead and
Yep.
download your copy today. Link is in the description down below, amongst DB's other fine things that he has. That's up
Indeed.
for sale and for you to join. So, all right. For this episode, we're going to be talking about. So, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about offensive characters. Well, offensive. Um, and so this week, we kind of thought we'd go a little bit the opposite way and talk about characters that are, I guess you could say,
Yeah.
well, let's explain what we mean by flat characters.
Yep. Of course, flat as justice is a thing that you hear in anime fandoms about people debating what kind of waifus they like best. Um, that don't mean that in the chestular sense this week. This is uh, more just trying to get attention.
Yes.
But uh, when I say flat, it's uh, it's more like characters that don't go through a big time arc in the stories that they're in.
Mhm.
Static characters is what they're also called, which is a less popular form of character these days, but actually has some advantages if you can pull it off right.
Mhm.
Um, what was the I believe it was G.K. Chesterton said something to the effect of in the classic stories, an ordinary man goes up against a dragon, or no, it's an ordinary man in a crazy chaotic world. Modern stories are about a crazy chaotic man in a normal world.
Mm.
Not the exact quote, but you get the gist.
Yeah.
Um, and so uh, that's it's kind of like the classic style of story. You
Mhm.
can where you can have an everyman who goes through the hero's journey, and that's not a flat character. But there's also a tradition of storytelling where, well, it might be easiest to do an example. Um, so classic serialized storytelling, you wouldn't necessarily count on the audience picking up every single book in a series or every single comic book on the shelf or every fiction magazine they see.
Mhm.
You basically, if you're pumping out in the, like say, I'll say 30s through the 70s or so, if you're cranking out the Shadow magazines, or you're making episodes of a TV show, or you're making issues of Spider-Man, you can't count on the audience having easy access to the entire corpus of that character, or for that matter, even wanting easy access to the corpus of that character.
Mhm.
They're down at the convenience store. They have a quarter in their pocket. Candy bar is a nickel. Soda is a dime, and they have a dime left over. Oh, hey, I'll pick up a comic while I'm at it.
Mhm.
Because that looks like an interesting thing that Batman is fighting this month. A monster made out of clay. I wonder how he deals with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And maybe they come back next month and like, a woman dressed in green, that's boring. I don't need to read that. Uh, but then they come back the month after and it's like, oh, the Joker's back? Sweet. Let's see what he's up to. But if you wrote the story assuming that they would pick up that Poison Ivy issue, you're kind of boned.
Yeah.
Or you have to be good at getting them up to speed. But you also can't necessarily have like a big story arc for Batman because, well, what's that's not what that type of storytelling is about.
Mhm.
Because the thing with the character arc is, or a big thing with a big story arc, character progression arc, is that what happens if you get to the end and Batman heals the wound in his soul left after his parents died. He's like, you know what? I don't need to fight crime anymore. Congratulations, you put yourself out of business.
Yeah.
Or you have to hastily come up with another character arc for him,
Mhm.
which that's hard to do because a character arc spins out of the character's core self, right? So
Yeah.
coming up with another character arc for them is not, it's going to feel tacked on.
Yeah. Yeah. It's yeah. You'd have to. I, you, if you went that route, you'd have to create another tragedy for him to go through.
Right? You'd almost now it occurs to me you could, if this is a little bit off topic, you could probably do that for Batman. The thing to do would be to have him fall in love with somebody, have that seem to heal him, and then she gets killed by the Joker while she's while they're at the altar or something like
Mm.
that.
Yeah.
Like she's around for a little bit. He's thinking about retiring, and that might actually get the Joker if Batman if he got the hint that Batman was on the verge of quitting. Oh
Yeah.
boy, he would not like that.
No, he wouldn't. No. Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah. You could. It would be like It'd be like the ending of on Her Majesty's Secret Service. I don't know if you saw that.
I don't think I've seen that one.
It's uh, George Lazenby playing.
Like the
Yeah,
only movie he was in, right?
right. Yeah, because he was a jerk. Nobody liked him.
I,
Nobody liked working with him.
I also heard that his agent said, "Nah, you don't want to be typecast as James Bond. You have a whole career in front of you," and then he really didn't.
No, he didn't. But yeah. So on Her Majesty. Spoiler alert if you haven't seen the movie. Although the movie's like this is like 50-year-old movie, but um, he he gets married to oh god, I can't remember the name of the character. I remember Diana Rigg played her. And just as they're driving off to go on their honeymoon, she gets killed by Blofeld.
Oof.
Mm.
Right. So you can't have Bond. And Bond is actually was on my short list of characters who exemplify this type of flat character arc.
Hmm.
Um, you can you couldn't have Bond settle down with somebody in a meaningful way because half the fun of the Bond series is vicariously living through Bond as he goes through and scores with dames around the world.
Yeah.
Um, Now, would it be interesting to have a spy with a wife at home? Yeah, but it'd be a fundamentally different series.
Well, then you'd have True Lies.
Yeah, that's
That's that was
yeah,
True Lies. Yeah.
yep. Okay, so yeah, that movie already exists. You don't
Yeah.
have to ruin Bond. You don't have to spoil the fun of Bond for it to
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah. um, but yeah, it's Yeah, if you're doing kind of like yeah, if you're doing things very episodic, it does benefit you to kind of like benefit you as a writer to, yeah, to kind of keep it, you know, keep him kind of the same way as he's dealing with each problem each week or each issue of
Mhm.
of the story.
Right. The main growth you'd have from the character is that say if the Joker starts trying to pull the exact same plan as he did last time, Batman sees through it and just immediately solves the problem. Like, oh, got fish turning up with weird smiles. Yeah, that got a Joker fish problem here.
Yeah.
Uh, Although somebody did point out once that it's weird that that villains never try the same plan twice, when so often the plan is just spoiled by some tiny little flaw in the plan that
Hmm.
would probably be pretty easy to reverse engineer. That's another case of, well, then you wouldn't have a story.
Yeah.
It would just be, hey, the villain, hey, you know that plan that the villain tried in issue number 275? Yeah, he tried it again in 278 and won this time.
Yeah. Oops.
Yeah, Spider-Man's dead. Sorry.
Yeah.
But so to go back to like how you make those types of stories interesting. So so again, so we've kind of defined what we mean by it is like you aren't going to have the character go through a major arc. Now you can have minor arcs, like oh, let's say that you have a character who, and this is something that's kind of rarer these days. Like let's say that you have a character who's a gruff detective who doesn't think that women belong in the police force, and he's been you've had a bunch of short stories written about this gruff detective, and one of his defining character traits is that he's kind of a sexist. Okay, well, you could have a story. You could have a story where he gets a female partner, and he's like, women don't belong in the force, and over the course of of that episode or story or issue or whatever whatever your format is of how you're breaking it up, uh, he comes around on it, and it's like maybe you soften that up from that point on, that aspect of him. It's like you can put like little tweaks, but I think like the mark of a flat character arc is that you could pick any like five stories from their corpus, and they would be, and the stories themselves would be recognizable. Like the actor might change, like James Bond. You pick five different stories from before Daniel Craig, and I think that you they will have differences, but they will be of a kind with each other. Also,
Mhm.
hey Rena, long time
Oh,
no
hey, Serena.
speak.
Yeah.
We are doing great.
Yeah, we are.
How's things going with your crowdfunding?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah, and from what I hear, she's doing very well. Yeah.
Yep. I know that when she retweets me on Twitter, I get the warning. You've been retweeted by an account with a lot of followers. Do you want to silence replies?
That's
Uh,
yeah.
nope. D- no, I mean, as much as we love as much as we love chesticles, I don't think we could get a whole hour out of that.
No, yeah.
To bring you up to speed, we're talking about flat character arcs, which is basically
Yes.
characters that don't change much over the course of the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, actually, Daniel Craig, James Bond is a great example of them modernizing a character by giving them a character arc,
Hmm.
because they, and I think that's why. Yeah. Spoiler alert if you care about the most recent James Bond movie. I haven't seen it and I know it, so I assume it's widely known that
Hmm.
he dies at the end of the most recent movie.
Yeah.
And that's because if you watch the other movies, that's basically you're completing the previously flat character's arc.
Hmm.
It's all about him ultimately getting revenge for what's her name from the first movie,
Vesper.
Vesper. Yeah, ultimately it's about him losing Vesper and ultimately avenging her.
Hmm. Yeah, and the way the character is, and DB was just saying that earlier. You you can't have James, necessarily. You can, but people don't necessarily want to see James Bond, being happily married and raising a daughter.
Right. Now, now counter argument. Maybe you could do that. Maybe you could have that version of Bond come to some sort of peace, but it doesn't seem like the type of thing that you'd have as a from modern. Actually, no, that version of Bond you couldn't have come to any sort of peace. Previous versions of Bond, I could see like oh, who was the one before him? Die Another Day,
Uh,
GoldenEye,
Brosnan.
Pierce Brosnan.
Yeah.
I could see that version of him. Uh, if he like, I don't know, like if he got his knee shot out or something, I could see him settling down and being happy,
Right.
like with the desk job. We're maybe not happy, but satisfied enough.
Oh, yeah.
Um, it really depends on the vision of the character.
hmm It's, oh, yeah. April 29th is. Oh,
Well,
wait, wait, I got to pick one wrong. Yeah, here we go. April 29th is when Serena's project launches. So,
and I'm glad and I hope you're feeling better now because
yeah,
yeah, yeah, I noticed you dropped out of stuff, and I didn't want to invade, so
yeah, yeah,
uh, and yeah, I mean 500 signups. I know you have a lot of enthusiasm, but that is always the problem. I mean, to to
yeah.
to deviate a little bit, I'm doing my free book giveaway. Um, Man, if only people were willing to plunk down $1 on that short story at the rate that they're willing to download a free book.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And we don't have the biggest audience here, but if you ever wanted to come on to try and get some promotion going, we'd be happy to have you.
Yeah. Yeah. We'd love to have you on. Yeah. And talk about the book and maybe other stuff.
Hmm.
But yeah, thanks, Serena. I appreciate it. And I'll pass that along to Bogdan. Yeah. Um, but yeah, so when and we were kind of talking before the show. I've been kind of going back and watching a lot of movies from the '80s, like you know, movies I'd seen before, and then movies I hadn't seen. Mainly just because like I just overlooked them, or they kind of made me seemed a little stupid at the time, but kind of went back and watched them again. And when you watch one of those movies, especially like sci-fi and like the genre movie in the '80s, like I mean, they get going. A lot of them get going
Hmm.
pretty quickly.
Oh yeah, it almost feels abrupt when you're used to modern pacing.
Yeah, and there a lot of the times, you really don't get a whole lot of time to get to know a character, before they're off doing whatever it is they got to do, and it's for modern, like you say, for a modern audience that can be a little jarring, but I will say there's a lot of advantages to doing it that way because you're getting the story going, and it's I hate to say it, at the point where I am right now, like I would rather sit and watch a 2 hour somewhat condensed story
Hmm.
rather than a long drawn out 2.5 to 3 hour movie. That's just
Or
like,
worse, a Netflix series or something like that.
yeah, exactly, yeah. Yeah, it's and that's kind of why, like, with like the Batman, like that movie's like 3 hours. I don't know if I want to go to see that in the theater. It's
Honestly, I've heard really good things about it.
Yeah, for the most, from pretty much everybody has said it's good. Although I think they said the ending is a little weird. But let's see, so love to get, yeah, yeah, absolutely. We'd love to have you on then. Um, but
Yeah,
yeah,
and I'll send you an invite to my Discord server. Also,
Yeah.
incidentally, I do have a Discord server.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
uh,
I keep forgetting to yeah, I keep forgetting to promote that. Yeah.
uh, well, to be fair, I'm pretty quiet there, so
Yeah.
it's
It's, but yeah, it's I guess what I'm trying to say is that over the last 20 or 20 or 30 years, pacing in stories has taken a lot longer than they used to.
right. And I sorry, I was distracted. Let's see here. Just gonna make a note here.
Mhm.
All right. So, yep. Now that we've gotten that, so yeah. So, and that's actually something that I've noticed in my writing is a tendency to want to navel gaze on the character's feelings, which for something like Magpie Wizard is a-okay because that's what the series is about. It's about a guy who fundamentally is evil turned to good, but doesn't want to admit that he's good.
Mhm.
But I don't want to be good. I like to be evil.
Yes.
To, qu- to quote to quote Skeletor.
Yeah.
And so like, there's going to be a lot of navel gazing, and it's about him kind of helping the people around him fix their personality. So you're going to have a lot of that.
Mhm.
So and then and then that's almost interrupted by the action elements, which it's like it is what it is. But man, it'd be so much easier if all I had to come up with every week was, if I was doing like a set of short stories, and it's like, what kind of monster of the week should I have them fight this time?
Mhm.
Maybe some sort of lamp monster. Yeah, like my two-color pulsating lamp back here.
You're not even trying anymore, are you?
Rawr, rawr.
When can we have it?
But now let's talk about some. Uh, it's like some characters with flat arcs, or flat-ish arcs,
Mhm.
and a character that has absolutely no that has no seeming impact on them can be a little dull.
Mhm.
Um, so there's some ways to compensate for that. For example, I mentioned I've listened to a couple of audiobooks based on The Shadow, not the old serials starring Orson Welles, I think.
Mhm.
Um, More the people taking the original novels and doing audiobooks of them.
Wow.
And the thing I noticed most of all was that the Shadow himself doesn't necessarily interact with the plot as often as you'd think, considering he's the title character.
Mhm.
Because when the point of the Shadow is that you want him to seem large and in charge, and he can get hurt or be behind the eight ball occasionally, but ultimately you want him to seem powerful and cool and three steps ahead of the enemy at all times.
Mhm.
Uh, so what do? Well, the Shadow has a bunch of agents who have different skills that they bring to the table, and maybe one is a lot of them are former con men or former criminals who saw the light and decided to help the Shadow out as his agents. And so, this guy got found by the mobsters and he's been kidnapped. Will the Shadow be able to save him in time?
Mhm.
It's like that. Those side characters might have an arc,
Mhm.
uh, or like, have you ever heard of Doc Savage?
Yes.
Hmm.
Mm.
Yeah, Doc Savage is actually the one I think I like better than Shadow. Shadow is more like a procedural crime thing and can be a little bit heavy-handed. Doc Savage is not afraid to let its freak flag fly.
Mhm.
It's almost like anime-esque in terms of how bizarre some of the characters are.
Yeah.
Like Doc Savage himself is a giant man of bronze who was trained to physical and scientific perfection by a group of scientists in the Amazon, and he's bronze because he was in the sun all the time. And he makes little weird trilling sounds in his throat, like when he's thinking, and he speaks. hundreds like he speaks dead languages, and that's how he and his men communicate with each other, so they can't be spied on. And his followers are weirdos. Like he has this one guy who I want to say is a chemical expert who has a build like an orangutan, like very just ugly man, like looks like a shaved ape almost. In the story I listened to, the villain has a couple of strong women who were part of the circus and were named Titania, and I forget what the other one was, and they could crush metal bars with their hands, and just very imaginative. Now it's a similar sort of idea there. Doc Savage isn't going to go through a meaningful character arc in the story. In the one I read, The Fortress of Solitude, incidentally, his name is Clark, and he has a fortress of solitude. He is a man of bronze, so a man of metal, and he came out years before Superman. So that's kind of one of those funny things.
Yeah.
Hey, D Rhino.
Oh, hey, D Rhino.
So one of the funny things about that story is like, what is he going to go through a big meaningful character arc? No. What happens is that he had discovered a bunch of secret weapons over the course of his adventures, and he had put them in a big mysterious dome in the Arctic guarded by Eskimos, and a villain stumbled across them and started using them to exact revenge. And at the end of it, the biggest character arc that Doc Savage goes through is, oh, well, maybe I need to do a better job guarding my stuff. I thought that putting in the Arctic and having a bunch of loyal Eskimos keep track of it would work.
But no.
Yeah. So who goes through the meaningful character growth? Well, arguably nobody, because there's kind of a fun adventure. But like this, it's like you have the ape chemical guy has a very harsh relationship with the pilot, I believe was who he didn't care for. And like he had a romantic entanglement with somebody, and it's like the side characters get to have more life and interest because the main character is almost more they're almost like a what do you call it, a catalyst in the chemical reaction of the story. They aren't necessarily changed by it, but they're there and they help facilitate it. Which is a completely valid way of doing it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it again, it moves the story along. It keeps whatever it is going, and of course, you kind of have to have somebody like Doc Savage in there in order for the other characters, for the other characters to grow.
Right, and also it also answers the question, well, how did you like, let's say there was no Doc Savage, like, okay, well, how did this pilot and this weird looking chemical expert and this mechanical engineer and this electronics engineer get together and decide to fight crime? Well, you might be able to come up with something still, but being, oh, they're Doc Savage's guys.
Yeah.
It gives you something to unite the whole thing.
Right.
It also gives you the advantage that if your point with someone like Doc Savage or the Shadow is they're supposed to be an exemplar of what the author thinks is important, then you can distribute the weakness to the other characters. It's like Doc Savage, like he was occasionally, he got in trouble, but he got in less trouble than his men did.
Yeah, and it also kind of reminds me of the A-Team.
I have to admit, I have never actually managed to see an episode of that. I saw the movie, which I'm told is not like it at all.
Yeah, I saw the movie too. I've watched I tried watching one episode of it one time, and it was so silly I couldn't sit through it because what I remember was the George Papard, who's the main, the leader of the team. Like, there's a scene where he gets slugged in the gut, and he's still got his cigar in his He's still got the cigar in his hand. It never falls out of his mouth, even as he gets punched in the gut.
Yeah, the man loved his tobacco.
Yeah. but like, so I mean, you look at those, so like the hook of that show was, you got four Vietnam veterans who were accused of a crime they didn't commit, and they went to prison. They broke out of prison, and now they're, soldiers for hire.
Hmm.
And I think it was one of the later seasons. You actually do find out what happened, and then, they actually get put back on trial and they get arrested again, because, because here's the thing: even though they were not, they didn't commit the crime they were convicted of, they still escaped from federal prison.
Yeah, that. Yeah, there is no, oh, sorry, you were innocent of the original crime clause.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, but you were in federal custody and you escaped, so you got to go back to jail.
Yep. Yeah, the A Team is a great example of flat character arcs.
Mhm.
You know that Mr. T is going to be a pilot, or he's not the pilot. You know that he's afraid of heights and is going to be knocked out to go on the thing, and so has to find
Right, yeah.
different ways to do that.
Right. And howling Mad Murdoch, he's he's the pilot, and he's a little cuckoo. That's really all you need to know about him. And then, and as I said, George Papard's character, he likes his cigars. And then you got Face, who's, just he's the looker in the group, and that's basically all you need to know about it. And then, they, somebody hires them for something, and then they go and they help them with the problem.
Yep, and they don't have to grow as characters to help with the problem.
Right.
It's not like you have the episode. Actually, I can't say that not having seen it, but I doubt there was the episode where BJ Baracus, aka Mr. T's character, was where they took him aside and yeah, we're gonna find the underlying psychological reason for your fear of heights, so that we don't have to drug you every time you go in the airplane.
Yeah.
Okay. And then after that episode, they never had to do the thing with him again.
Yeah. Yeah. No, they would never do that, because then that just ruins the whole shtick of that whole gag.
And for that matter, it's flat character arcs can work really nicely in shows where you're intentionally working with a formula.
Mhm.
One of the shows that I've seen that I think was the most creative with formula-based writing was probably Phineas and Ferb,
Mhm.
because every episode you had certain lines that characters would say in a certain order.
Mhm.
Hey Phineas, what you doing?
Yeah.
Where's Perry?
Where's Perry? Yeah.
Yeah. And you could play around with that.
Yeah.
You knew that every episode that that the boys would make something incredible, that Candace would try to get their mom to find out about it, that Dr. Doofenshmirtz would be working in the background on some evil scheme, that Perry would foil it in a way that destroyed whatever the boys were working on, and
Mhm.
Candace would look like a crazy person at the last minute because, like, Mom, they built that roller coaster in the backyard. Well, I don't see it, but it was right here. I worry about you.
Yeah. And there's usually a musical number in there too.
Yeah, it's quite right, especially once they realized people love the musical numbers. They
Yeah.
actually went back and like the first episode didn't have a musical number because they hadn't realized that that was a thing they could do yet. So they actually went back and made a musical version of that episode in a later season to restore balance to the force, I guess.
Yes.
Eh, Now, here's the thing that also occurs to me about some of these formulaic plots.
Mhm.
Um, I almost wonder if part of the reason we've gone away from this is because of internet jerks with opinions like us.
Mm.
We are the problem. Because I remember talking about that show with a friend of mine, and he said, if you really think about it, the parents are kind of awful to Candace because at the very least, something is going on, and even if that something is just their child has a psychological problem, but you never like have her go to therapy. Like, so where do these delusions come from?
Yes. Now, why do you think your brothers are doing these things?
Or like a logical thing that she could do. If like all Candace would have to do, go down to Best Buy, pick up some Arlo web security cameras,
Yeah.
point them at the backyard, and she finds out about the brothers in 5 minutes and has video
Yes.
proof backed up in the cloud.
Yeah.
And she's just out a couple $100, which considering all the stuff that the brothers are buying all the time, they clearly are loaded.
Yes. Aren't you a little young to be buying this stuff? Why, yes, we are.
Mm. Eh, and in fact, if they did the episode where Candace did the smart thing, she's down there at Best Buy. Aren't you about the right age to be buying a webcam? Yes, I am.
Yes, I am. Although I will say they did do one episode where the parents do see them doing something. They do get caught, and it's kind of like one of those like, oh, it was all a dream episodes, um, where they do get caught, and then Phineas and Ferb get sent off to a re-education camp, and they're turned into mindless drones.
Right, with no imagination.
Yes.
Right. But like, I almost would say that fairly flat characters, you almost like, you have your suspension of disbelief, but like, sometimes it's like your suspension of disbelief is okay. In this universe, people can go faster than light with their spaceships. There's a magical thing that unites everybody called the Force. That isn't quite what we experience in reality, but for this story, we'll accept that.
Hmm.
For certain types of flat character stories, you almost have to go, okay, we have a premise. Nobody will ever question the premise in particular ways, because now you can have now this can result in very bad storytelling. Like you were saying yourself, you thought that the A-Team was a little bit too silly to watch anymore.
Hmm.
But if you go in knowing what you're getting into, and it strikes you right, it's like, okay, I want to see different permutations of this basic idea. What can they come up with?
Hmm.
Another example of one. This is a show I know more by reputation, but Columbo. Every episode of Columbo, you start off knowing who done it, and Columbo has to catch up with it. It looks like he's not going to at the last minute, and then he asks that one question.
There's just one more thing.
Yep. Uh, Now it's like you don't deviate from the formula, because part of the fun of it is like there is fun in certain types of repetition, because you as the audience member actually feel a little bit smarter, because like, I recognize that or I understand that reference.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'll go back to another old TV show that I know my grandparents used to watch it, and I'm sure many people's grandparents probably watched it. Murder, She Wrote, with Angela Lansbury, where she's the crime writer who solves crime, and then she actually solves crimes, and it's the same formula every week, and for people over the age of 75, it was fun show to watch.
Yep. Oh, another example of a relatively flat character, Sherlock Holmes.
Mm, yes.
Because the fun of Sherlock Holmes isn't him. Well, actually, you know what? I have not seen it because I don't generally like BBC products besides Monty Python. But I would wager you money that in the new Sherlock Holmes TV show on BBC, that they do deconstruct his character a bit.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, so, but like in the original stories, it's more like, oh, what kind of weird scenario can you come up with, and how do you go about solving it?
Oh, hey, Will, good to see you.
Hey.
But yeah, it's yeah, they well, and the other thing too was the formatting of each episode. Like each season had 3 episodes, but each episode was an hour and a half.
Okay, so basically a short movie.
Hmm. Yeah, and yeah, and they deconstructed him quite a bit, and they also did with Watson. Because Well, with Sherlock, I mean, they kind of went back to the way it was in the Conan Doyle books, where he's a drug addict,
Hmm.
and he's very antisocial, and but he's brilliant, but a little off. In the yes, smash the like button. Um, but he the other part of it too was that they kind of made it seem like is he really that good? Is he kind of a bad guy? So yeah, there was that deconstruction in there, but yeah, like a lot of the I would say like the Robert Downey Jr. movies.
Hmm.
I would say probably went back to the old formula ish, where they he's portrayed as being very eccentric and a little weird, but um at the same time, he's solving the crimes.
Hmm.
He's trying to figure out, like, okay, how did this guy who died come back to life?
Hmm. Right. Uh, and actually, I think I was thinking about this earlier, and I have a theory about what did it. Technology is what killed the beast.
Mm,
Hmm. So, like I mentioned earlier, for a lot of this serial fiction, you didn't have movies at home. You couldn't buy or stream a collection of every TV show.
right,
If you couldn't go to your bookstore and pick up huge volumes of back issues of Spider-Man or Batman or whatever.
right,
So you as the writer had to assume, okay, I have to make something that is compelling on its own. And that's actually where the formula would help a lot. Because if I'm cranking out a short story every single month with this detective or with this crime fighter, I like like the Shadow at the top of it, he was cranking out two of these mini novellas a month. And so
oh,
uh, for the magazines. So
yeah,
you you had to come up with big character arcs that would only get in the way of
mhm,
the experience.
right, yeah, and yeah, you make a fair point. Yeah, that with the way, yeah, the advent of computers and TV and internet and all that, I think, yeah, definitely killed a lot of the serialized, or I should say a little more episodic way of storytelling that was very common 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago.
Right. Even relatively simple media like children's shows I've watched that have come out in the last 10 years will have a season long story that they're building towards
Right.
invariably. Like, say, Gravity Falls. That one's a mystery show that has like a sort of a escalating danger over the course of the series.
Hmm.
If Gravity Falls had come out in the 90s, I, except for Gargoyles, which somehow slipped through every crack
Yeah.
possible at Disney,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
would have just been every week would have just been the characters going out and having an adventure, and nothing really would have been accomplished.
Right.
Like Darkwing Duck. Darkwing Duck does not have a ongoing storyline.
Yeah.
It is just the silly cartoon Duck Man fighting crime.
Right. And same with Batman the animated series. Like it
Hmm.
was, there wasn't an overarching story with that series. Now, you did have like the occasional two-part episode, but that's just two-part episode.
Yeah.
It Yeah, and it's mostly just different different crimes that oh, Batman's got to stop Joker from the Joker fish, which I know you mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
um
Actually,
or
I'll be right back.
okay, yeah,
But go ahead and keep the people entertained. Sorry, nature
yeah, yeah,
calls.
yeah, no problem. um yeah, so and then in with Batman, yeah, it was just like, okay, well, Batman solves this crime and this happens here and there. and of course with X-Men was a little different. You had, that show definitely had some story arcs to it, but every now and then they would do like a single episode. But in order to be able to tell those types of stories, obviously, like we were saying, you have to keep the character, somewhat flat. You can't just having this, character arc within one of the, like a 20-minute episode isn't possible. You're muted.
So I am. The, and the other thing, I actually ended up watching an episode of Batman the Animated Series the other day, and it was just about him fighting this guy called the Clock King. And what I found really amusing was that because it wasn't trying to build towards being towards something huge, it was
Hmm.
just Batman versus a guy who's superhumanly organized.
Hmm.
Like he knows he knows every train schedule. He knows how long certain mechanical processes take, how long certain chemical processes take. He has watched Batman in the news and knows how long it takes for him to throw a punch, so he can he can dodge every blow because he
Yeah.
knows the timing exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I just found myself thinking, man, in not 10 years later, Batman was like regularly fighting superpowered supervillains because you had that threat escalation. But that first season, you could totally get away with just having, oh, who's Batman fighting? A very organized man.
Yeah. 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 It's yeah, the golden age of storytelling, as I said before. And you know
Now,
yeah. Yeah.
now interestingly, there were two series from the other comic book company that I think were part of the big change of that. X-Men and Spider-Man the animated series from the 90s, because
Yeah.
those were heavily serialized.
Yeah, I was. Yeah, I when you were off, I mentioned X-Men. Yeah, having more serialized episodes with it. Although I think occasionally they did do standalone episodes, but
Yes.
but
Spider-Man was especially guilty of it. Like some friends and I
mhm,
decided to watch an episode on Disney Plus the other day,
yeah.
and we realized just how awful that show was for jumping into random episodes because like, oh, let's watch this one about Morbius. It's like it's the middle of this ongoing storyline where his mutant powers or his powers are fluctuating, and he had just met the X-Men, and
Okay.
he lost his powers and he gained his powers and he got extra arms, and then it was just like
Oh,
and
jeez.
this is all in the and like yeah, there was like a one-shot storyline about him fighting Morbius, the living vampire, but there was like so much stuff going on.
Yeah, yeah. I remember the Stargate shows being a lot like that. Um, where you think you could watch like a standalone episode where
Mhm.
they're trying to stop something, but then they mention something that happened in another episode, another season before, and you're like, what's going on? Yeah, if you haven't watched the show, you're like, what are you they talking about, huh?
Yeah, I think it's like with in the case of X-Men, apparently what happened was the some executive on the show wanted to be able to do not just two-parters but multi-parters, and she was told no, that makes it much harder to schedule the shows because we have to show them in particular order. And apparently, what she did to make it happen was she said, "But look, we can save money every episode because we can have it next time on or previously on X-Men."
Ah.
And that was apparently part of the winning argument to let them do what they wanted to do with the ongoing storytelling.
Uh, Actually, I think I know the woman you're referring to. I believe she's the one who had the idea for Venus de Milo in Ninja Turtles.
Oh, well, you can't win them all.
Yeah, you win some, you lose some.
But so yeah, like, and I think the other thing, the other reason, actually, cable was probably the first blow against episodic storytelling, because let's say that you had a show like Stargate or even Babylon 5 that was big on your network, and you wanted to get people up to speed, you just pick out a Saturday or Sunday and go, hey, we're having a marathon
Mm.
we're having this big exciting conclusion. tune in this Saturday. We're going to have a 6-hour marathon, get you caught up to speed, and then we'll show the new episode.
Yeah.
Where in the days of like having the big three, you had or 3 or 4 regular stations without cable. You couldn't really do that as easily because you're like, oh man, we're devoting our entire block here to one show. I hope people really want to see I Love Lucy.
Yeah. Well, and and they couldn't do it either when the president came on.
Right. It's like if the president had to give a speech, man, you just had no options.
Yeah, yeah.
But then, like, I think the real killing blow to it was things like Netflix, like cable was big, and being able to buy DVD collections and Netflix shows changed how people watch television.
Hmm.
Because like back in the day, it would be like if you had a show that was on every day after school, you'd watch it once a day, and you couldn't binge it unless
Right.
you were very careful with your VHS tapes and record them in sequence,
Hmm.
or if there was one of those marathons on.
Right.
So that suddenly changes the whole name of the game when I can boot up Netflix, start with episode 1, and start with episode 1, end on episode last over the course of a weekend.
Hmm.
If your show is formulaic and episodic, you're going to get bored very quickly.
Yeah. Which is something I've kind of noticed with when you go and when you do binge one of those old shows from the 80s or the 90s,
Mm-hmm.
and it is formulaic. You watch like 2 or 3 of them in a row, you're like, okay, what else is there?
I'm full.
Yeah.
You almost have to do something like make a schedule for yourself,
Hmm.
which is a odd amount of work to do for a TV show, but that might just be the way to make it so you can actually enjoy yourself.
Yeah, yeah, it's yeah, interesting times we live in now.
Yeah. So we kind of I kind of diverted us from talking about flat characters specifically to more looking into why don't we have as many flat characters as we used to.
Hmm.
And I think that's just I think it is the technology making it just changing the name of the game,
Hmm.
because you start having the technology to support long running stories. And as an author, a long running story is in some ways easier to write individual parts of than episodic.
Hmm.
Like Magpie Wizard Book 5, I'm currently on like 76,000 words. It is much easier to write one story that takes 100,000 words than 5 stories that take 20,000 words, which doesn't seem like it should be the case, but because you still have to plan, you still have to figure out what you're going to do. Um, that's what, like, you might have those little formulas that help it, like, okay, I'm going to have a character do this, I'm going to have a character do that. But like, if I had 20,000 page or 20,000 word stories and I had to come up with a threat or something for each one of them, I'm now doing planning. And it's like, a lot of the writing process, once you're past a certain point, is kind of automatic, right? Because
Hmm.
once you know your characters, you can just crank out conversations with them that you wouldn't have time for in a short story. But in a novel, you can slow your pace a little bit.
Right.
Like if I was writing Magpie Wizard in a different way, what I have as book 5 right now, I could probably turn into 3 short stories, but that would take a lot of planning.
Hmm.
I'd have to make sure that because I'm postmodern in how I'm writing it, I would have to be very careful with the character arcs because that would get in the way of the episodic storytelling
Right. Yeah.
and defeat the purpose.
Yeah. Yeah. You only have like you were saying, you know there's only so much story you can tell in 20,000 words.
Right.
And if you've got something, if you have a story to tell, if you have a the conflict or the problem that the characters have to solve, like you have to get into it almost right, practically right away.
Right. You
Yeah.
can't do any of like what I like to do, which is, oh, he gives a quick summary, you see what he's doing, he has an interaction with another character to kind of set the stage for what the book's going to be about. Then you can have some lengthy conversations with the characters, and uh, you may not have action for a decent chunk of the book because it is about the characters. On
Hmm.
the other hand, if it was about, if it was the weekly adventures of the Magpie Wizard and his friends, then I would have to approach it very differently, and it might actually be harder to write in many ways.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we may have highlighted an issue with why movie adaptations of novels
Hmm.
usually are not as good as the novel, because when you're adapting a novel into a movie,
Hmm.
there's a lot of characterization that usually gets left out.
Oh yeah, like novels often take place over months or years in universe, have to kind of get truncated into a week or less for the movie.
Right. Yeah, like an example of that would be, the first one that come in my head would be the Shining. You know, Stephen King famously did not like the movie The Shining, the Stanley Kubrick movie,
Right.
because there wasn't enough characterization, particularly with Jack Torrance. Because in the novel, because as he was describing it in the novel, Jack Torrance is actually a guy who's trying to get better. He's trying to stop drinking. He's getting his temper under control and all that. But in the movie, the way Nicholson's playing him, he's like, "Oh, this is really great." He likes the idea of being staying in a hotel over a long winter, where in the same hotel where another caretaker, murdered his whole family. It's just, and so, but and like you're saying, like, I mean, they condensed that. I think that story takes place over like a week or two in the movie. I don't know how long it takes place over the book because I haven't read the book, but yeah.
Yeah, and that's actually that's very similar in that I thought if I ever went the route that you and Rena are going and made Magpie Wizard, crowdfunded comic, I would, oh boy, would it be different.
Mm,
Because you couldn't have these lengthy conversations. I'd have to find a way to summarize what they were getting into like very short things. It might even be characters cut,
yeah,
to, or introduce them in a different sequence just to try and make sure that I had space for everything.
yeah, yeah. I've had to. I mean, I've had to take out like a bunch of different, like action scenes and different
Mhm.
plot lines in Guardian Angel, just so that I can condense it down into a two part story arc, that with each, with one being over 60 pages and the other one being over 50 pages. Oh,
Yeah, and that's a pretty long comic book.
yeah.
Yeah. And I guess what I want to say is that like quite often we come in here and it's like tisk tisk Hollywood, how dare you go this direction?
Mhm.
But I think what I've kind of realized is that flat characters are a lot of fun and they can like really uh, work, but navel gazing is easier to write.
Mhm.
Uh, and if you're being told fill a certain amount of time on Netflix because we measure your success by how many minutes people watch, you don't necessarily want to be short and snappy and satisfying to watch one episode of. That can get you canceled.
Mhm.
See Cowboy Bebop.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and it's, and I agree. It's very easy to write like a really long story,
Mm.
because you're trying to, because you want to get as much information in about the setting and the world and the characters as possible, so that people can enjoy the story and know the characters and relate to them, and and grow to like them, and you know that can be hard to do in many cases, when you're keeping it strictly to the story of this one particular issue or this one particular episode.
Yeah, I think it's something where we might just have to live with rounded characters, even when a flat character would be more satisfying, just because that's kind of the nature of how media is being consumed these days.
Yeah. And if there are flat characters, they're usually just a one-off. They
Right,
they pop in and then they're gone. Yeah.
right. Or it's like a one-shot movie, which is probably the last genre. Like action movies are probably the last genre where you could have characters like that, or procedural movies.
Hmm.
Even then, there's a tendency to want to navel gaze, which that says something about modern psychology, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. It kind of makes me wonder. Like, I mean, I've been seeing the ads for Law and Order because they're bringing Law and Order back. And
Hmm.
you talk about a show that was episodic. Like that show, I mean, with a formula. I mean, there'd be a crime, the detectives would investigate the crime, they'd get a suspect or they'd get the person they think committed the crime, and then the prosecutors would go to the trial, and then they'd prosecute them, and
Hmm.
stuff would happen in between. And that sort of formula worked 30 years ago, but I'm curious to see like how they would do it today, because I don't know. I wonder how long that show's gonna last. To be honest, I don't. It's probably not gonna last that long.
Yeah, probably enough time to. I mean, probably. I think that probably the objective of bringing that back is that the average age of TV watchers is old enough that they would remember that show fondly.
Hmm.
But it's also probably just something to like make people aware of it, so that whatever streaming service they're on can like, oh, maybe I should check out the old episodes on Paramount Plus or whatever it's on. There's too many streaming services to
I
keep
think
track of.
it'll probably be on Peacock,
Okay, that's right. That because that's NBC, right?
right? Yeah. So yeah, so they're bringing the show back so they can get more people to subscribe to Peacock.
Probably that's probably their scheme.
Yeah. Yeah, but that show had flat characters in it. I mean, you really didn't know very much about any of the detectives or the prosecutors or anything like that. It's just,
They had the role to play.
they had the role to play. Yeah. All right. Well, we've kind of we're at the end of the show. If anybody has questions you would like to ask, feel
Now's the
free to
time.
ask. Yes, now's the time. Or maybe they're bringing Law and Order back because Sam Waterston needs a paycheck. Ugh.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the interesting things about the change to streaming is that all those residuals contracts no longer apply because apparently I believe they only were related to broadcast television because
Ah,
they weren't written with the assumption of that.
yeah, because they didn't exist when those contracts were written.
Yep. So
Yeah.
I remember I listened to an interview on NPR like probably 15 years ago now, where the guy who played the barista at on Friends said that because he was a speaking role, he had been like an extra on the show, but then there's like, hey, does anyone here know how to run an espresso machine convincingly? He's like, yeah, I used to be a barista, and so suddenly he had a speaking role, and suddenly his residuals were basically yeah after the show had been canceled for 10 years at that point. it, the residuals were keeping him. Yeah, I was like, so how are the residuals? It keeps me. It pays the rent.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, that God, those the contracts that the main cast signed for that show were outrageous.
yeah. Didn't they all like hang together and say none of us are going to accept less than $1 million an episode?
Yeah, and I think it was like 250,000, like in syndication or something like that.
Yeah. Which to be fair, if the company is making that much money off of you, you deserve a piece of it.
That's true. Yeah, and I will say they were smart to say that we're all getting paid the same amount of money.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because boy, that would be a quick way to destroy that show. Would be to make it so you hated each other.
Oh yeah. 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 All right. Well, if nobody's got any questions for us, I guess we can call it a day. DB, any parting words?
Um, sometimes as tempting as it is to call modern writers hacks, you do have to occasionally realize the environment that they're writing in and have some perspective, as much fun as it is to rage at them.
Yes.
So until we hit a new regular distribution medium where weekly content is the norm, or slowly released content is the norm, then we're probably stuck with overly round characters.
Yeah.
Although I will say that the trend in streaming on non-Netflix platforms to release shows weekly, like like Disney does and some of the others do,
Mhm.
is probably a step in the right direction, because that can help rebuild that classic style.
Yeah. And it also keeps people from canceling their subscription after 1 month.
Right. That is not the reason they do that, but
Well, yeah.
it has the potential for long-term benefits.
Yes. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everybody for tuning in. We really appreciate it. As we said before, smash the like button, subscribe, hit the bell, all that good stuff.
Yep.
And
Go and pick up a free copy of Second Contact on Kindle.
yes, do that. And yeah, we'll see you all next week. Good night, everybody.
Bye.